next slides very quickly. This is a welcome back for Dr. Ellen Vorenkamp from the Michigan Assessment Consortium. And she kicked us off earlier this year at our fall quarterly meeting, talking with us about assessment literacy. And we've had some questions about why are we focusing on assessment literacy this year? And so we wanted to bring you back to a couple spaces in the assurances. These have been here since the beginning. Where we're talking about some of your requirements as a coach is to administer and help analyze instructional assessments, but also one of our professional learning focuses should be assessment literacy. And we've done a lot of work around that in the area of Essential 9, but we really wanted to lean into Ellen and all of her knowledge as we are looking forward to what is coming out of PA 146. So here are some things that align with the new dyslexia legislation. And the first one is that we're going to be getting a list coming out here very shortly on a list of assessments by January 1st. Okay, so we're trying to help all of you get ahead of that and really be in alignment with what is coming for you. Also in 27-28, so starting very shortly in the next year and a half, we will be working to select assessments, universal screeners and progress monitoring assessments that align to that list, but also build a true assessment system for the districts. And you will be most likely called in to have some of those conversations and decision-making pieces. And so we also want to talk about implementing research-based assessment and instructional practices. And so that is all going to be a part of our learning as well. So when we think about MyMTSS and the way that the universal screening measures are coming out, this is all in the handbook. And what they are talking about is that we really need to, in a balanced assessment system, be thinking about our screening, progress monitoring, diagnostic, summative, and experiential assessments. And the thing that we're going to be talking about today that often gets missed is also that formative assessment piece that Dr. Ellen's going to take us through today. So we just want to give her a big welcome back and let you know that our learning that you're doing with her really aligns to not only the assurances of the grant funding, but also getting us ahead of where we need to be in the coming months. So welcome, Ellen, and I'm going to allow you to share your screen.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me back and allowing me to come in and share some more information around assessment literacy. And in particular, today we're going to focus in on the formative assessment process. We did a little bit of that when we were together, but I want to just dig a little bit deeper into the formative assessment process and how it relates to some of your essentials and some of the work that Shellie just mentioned. So here is a kind of a grounding slide. The QR code can take you to all of the handouts. They're also all linked in your agenda. Our agenda today is going to be pretty simple. I wanted to take a minute just to review some of our previous learning because I don't know about you guys, but I can't remember what I did yesterday. So, a couple of weeks ago, it's been a while. So I just wanted to ground us back in some of that prior learning. And then just dig deeper into and explore and discover some more learning in terms of the formative assessment process. And as we do that, we're going to be weaving in those essentials, in particular, Essential 3 and Essential 9. And I really want you guys to see if you can make some of those connections to some of the information that I'm sharing with you and what you might want to see as you're coaching some of your teachers and thinking about what the information that they're gathering and how they're using that information to determine where to go next in the learning, but also in terms of the students and how they're grouping the students and using this information to really make sure that we are continuing to move our students forward. So outcome one, previous when we were together up in Saginaw a couple of weeks ago, we talked a little bit about assessment literacy. We do think of assessment literacy as the other assessment, the other literacy bucket here in the state of Michigan. And really, it is the MAC's mission to really make sure that all of our teachers are assessment literate, that they understand the balanced assessment systems and where all of these different pieces and parts within a balanced assessment fit. We had some conversation around the importance of all of them and making sure that all the people within the system have the information that they need to make the decisions that they need. We know that we are constantly adding things to this diagram. We've got the diagnostic tools and screeners that you guys use pretty prominently within your own work. Now we're getting some of this dyslexia pieces. So we keep adding to this bucket and we keep putting all this emphasis on the orange and the green and now into the blue, but we don't always put the emphasis on where the research shows us that we have the most impact. And of course, that's the classroom level, the purple level of assessment. And so that's why I'm here today, is just to kind of remind you that if you really want to live into the centers, if you really want to live into MTSS Tier 1, if you really want to live into making sure that the students are getting what they need in order to be successful in the moment to move themselves forward, it really is that purple area where teachers need to have a little bit more thought. And of course, it needs to be coherent. It would be lovely if we had some assurance from the state that everything that they're requiring us to do, in addition to what we're doing in our own classrooms, in our own districts, is all aligned, that we're all headed towards the same outcome, that we're all hoping that our students are going to be successful on the end all be all, which is the state assessment, the MSTEP, the SATs. But also in life, just making sure that we are giving them what they need in order to be successful and that we have a common definition of what success looks like. So that coherence piece is really important. Some of that is within our control, especially in the purple areas. Once we get into some of the blue and the green, we are taking the vendor and or the state's word that those are really aligned with our standards and providing us that coherence that we're looking for. And then, of course, we know that it has to be continuously done. We talked about this when we were together last time. And it really is this purple area that we have the most control. It's closest to what the teachers are doing in the classroom. It's closest to what the students know and understand. It's the one that we can make the most connections to for our students. And I left you last time we were together with this particular quote from Rick Stiggins. If assessment isn't working productively day to day in the classroom, during and at the end of the learning, if bad decisions are made based on inaccurate evidence due to inept assessment, the other levels of assessment just can't overcome the dire consequences. Many of our kids already have a frame of mind in terms of what their assessment capabilities are. And oftentimes then when you go and ask them to sit down and try their hardest on an NWA or to do the MSTEP or to do those screeners, they have a bad taste in their mouth already, and they're not going to take it as seriously as they should or as we would want them to. So really thinking about that classroom level of assessment. Again, towards the very end of the session last time, we defined formative assessment as defined here in the state of Michigan through the Formative Assessment for Michigan Educators Program, which is in its 18th year supported by the Michigan Department of Ed. Just give you a moment to look that over. When we were together last time, we talked about some keywords, that it's planned, that it's ongoing, that it's a process, that it's not a thing. It's used by the students and the teachers. It occurs during the learning, not only at the end. The end is often too late for some of our students. We want to make sure that we have that impact during the learning so that we can have the success we want when we get to the end. We need to gather evidence. It needs to be quality evidence. It needs to be aligned evidence with what our learning targets and success criteria are. The more you know about your discipline, the better off you're going to be, because you can start to anticipate some of those misconceptions and some of those gaps that the students might have. The more you understand the pedagogy of how kids actually learn that particular discipline that you're teaching is also very important. And really the ultimate goal is to create these students that are self-directed, that have that agency to be those lifelong learners that we're looking for, and that the state is proclaiming that we're going to be producing through that portrait of a graduate that we are starting to hear more and more about. So in thinking about that, I also want us to think about Essential 3. And you guys know this a lot better than I do, but when you think about small group and individual instruction using a variety of these grouping strategies, and being flexible within those groups, knowing that we don't want the Blackbirds to stay the Blackbirds forever. If somebody within the Blackbirds, has got that skill, has improved themselves, is able to move on to, the next layer of learning, we need evidence, right? We need evidence to determine how we are actually grouping these kids, how we're moving them forward, how we're moving them along. That happens within the formative assessment process. And then, of course, we know that Essential 9 fits right into this as well. There are various ways that we can gather this evidence. It does not have to be a sit down, a type of written test or multiple choice test. It can be the observations, it can be the conversations, it can be the questions that you're asking and the questions that the students are asking, how they're responding to certain things, those little snippets of conversation as you're walking by. There's just all kinds of different evidence that we collect on a daily basis about the students and where they're at and where they're how they're moving forward. So just kind of a quick recap, and what I'd like to do now is dig deeper into the formative assessment process. When we think about the formative assessment process in the state of Michigan, this is the graphic that we are currently using. This has been updated, and then the new version is much nicer. And we got rid of that god-awful yellow. It's not my favorite color. It's much more pleasing to the eye, and it has a lot more information included in it. But the tenets of how we think about formative assessment as a process remain. So you'll note that it is a cycle, that there are arrows that are continuously flowing. It is a feedback loop that is predicated on students giving us the evidence. We're analyzing and interpreting that evidence to figure out where our students are at, what they need, what misconceptions they have, what we need to do next in terms of the teaching, what they need to do next in terms of that learning. We know that it's guided by 3 guiding questions that help us, and that's on the right-hand side. Where are we going, right? We have to have clarity in terms of what it is that we want the students to know and be able to do. We need to figure out where the students are currently so that we can kind of get their starting point so that we know how to continually move them along. And then we need to think about what are all the activities, all the strategies, all the practices that we need to engage them in to move them from point A to point B. When we think about those guiding questions, we also think about some strategies or components that we can put into play in our classrooms. And many of these dovetail right into that essential 3 and that essential 9. They also dovetail very nicely with coaching. And so I'm going to have you think a little bit about Stephen Stewart when he came in back in August or before, when you guys had him as one of your guest speakers. And he was talking about strategies and practices that you can engage in as a coach. These are oftentimes some of the things that we're asking the teachers to engage in as well when they're implementing the formative assessment process. Because when you implement the formative assessment process really well, the teacher is no longer the sage on the stage, so to speak. They are more of a facilitator. They are more of a coach. And they are more about relinquishing some of that power of being the teacher and creating teachers within all of their students so that we become that community of learners. So when we think about those components or big strategies, there are 5 of them. There are planning, learning target use, eliciting evidence of student understanding, formative feedback, and then making decisions in terms of what next steps might be based on that evidence and that feedback that you're giving to your students. You'll notice that these boxes are color-coded. They go back to the circles within the graph on the left-hand side. And so when we think about where are we going, we think about planning. We think about having clarity in terms of our learning targets. When we think about where our students are currently, we think about gathering evidence. And that evidence isn't just pre and post. It's pre, during, post, right? Okay. And anytime you do the during, that's the formative assessment process. And when you gather that evidence, you're constantly giving the students the feedback, and you're constantly using that information yourself to figure out where to go next in that learning process. So what I'd like to do is take each one of these 5 components and just dig a little bit deeper. So in the planning component, one of the practices that we engage in when we are implementing formative assessment well within our classrooms is planning. We do not think that formative assessment happens just by chance. We don't think it happens just because you're in that moment. It can, but we know that the best formative assessment practice is when teachers think very intentionally and purposefully about what it is they're doing in terms of their lesson, and they plan it out. Formative assessment planning is a little bit different than just the traditional lesson planning that we all probably engaged in when we were in school. Most lesson planning that I see when I go into classrooms, it's all about what we're doing, right? We're going to do this, and then we're going to do this page, and then we're going to answer these questions, and then we're going to get together and have groups, and then it's all about the doing. When we think about planning for formative assessment, it's all about the learning. It's all about students will be learning this. Students will be learning this. Their knowledge that they're going to gain is about this. The skill that they're going to acquire is about this. And then secondary to that are the activities. We have clarity around what we want them to learn first and what those pieces of knowledge and skill and content are. And then we find the best strategy or the best activity, the best task, the best engagement to allow the kids then to learn that information through that particular engagement or task. It's really about creating ownership for the students and making it very goal focused in terms of the knowledge that we want them to acquire. We want to make sure that the students can show us the proficiency of that particular learning target through whatever it is they're going to say, do, make, or write, right? And so we have to have clarity in terms of what it is that we want the students to know and be able to do so that we can make sure that we have the right tool to get the right information to see if they can say, do, make, and write whatever it is that we're asking them to learn. We also know that when we think about this planning piece, we really want to dig into the metacognition of our students. It's not just about if they know the correct answer, it's how did they get to that correct answer. It's not just if they know this piece of content, but if they can recognize how that content is connected to prior learning, if they can take that piece of knowledge and connect it to something else or to transfer it into some sort of new information or some sort of new context. And then, of course, we know that along the way, we have to give them the practice that they need in order to solidify these new pieces of knowledge, these new pieces of content. And that practice needs to be practice. It needs to be in a low stakes environment where they are given the time to make the mistakes, learn from those mistakes, reflect on those mistakes, and continue to move themselves forward. So the first handout that you have in that document file is an example of a planning template that we use within the same program. And what I'd like you to do is just take a few minutes and look it over. Think about the graphic that we just talked about, those 5 components of the formative assessment process, and the elements or the practices that are engaged within those components, learning target use, learning progressions, exemplars, rubrics, those types of things. And just kind of see how that's reflected in this planning template. And just what are you noticing? And then how might you use this within your current context, if at all? Because it's just a thought. So I'm putting it out there. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to look it over. What are you noticing? And how might you use this within your own current context? And then we'll just put a thought or two in the chat box, if you don't mind, and do a quick chat reflection.
We are working on trying to get a Google slide version of the slide deck for all of you too. So thank you for letting us know.
Nice. I'm seeing some nice comments in there. Give people a moment to add your thoughts and then scroll back up to the top and just look at some of those comments in that chat reflection. Could definitely be used as part of a coaching cycle, thinking about that planning piece. Backwards design is very much apparent here. What is it that we want the students to know and be able to do? Get that set first, and then kind of start to think about how you actually then lead them to that outcome. You know, what is that learning progression that's going to get them there? Yeah. Definitely keeps the focus on the student learning. I would agree. It also asks teachers to dig into their own thinking around the disciplinary literacy piece and the pedagogical piece to start to think about, you know, if you've taught this content a couple of times, you probably know what misconceptions kids are going to come into this new learning with, or what some of those gaps might be. Identify them, be ready for them, be prepared, have plan B ready to go if this group of kids actually does have some of the same issues as kids in the past have had. That's information that you can use and take and just, you know, be ahead of the game. And instead of trying to, you know, retrofit, you know, you're proactive and you're ready for those misconceptions. Really does keep the focus in on the learning, you know, there's really not much about what we're going to do in this particular template. It's really, what are we learning and what questions am I going to ask? There's a lot of research around questions and asking good questions. And the research shows that if you plan out those questions beforehand, you're much more likely to ask higher order thinking, metacognitive questions where kids really have to think and then clarify and then you can probe. And really less of those short answer, that those close-ended questions that we tend to do when we're kind of talking off the top of our heads. So if we plan it out, we are much more likely to be successful. Good, Lindsay. Helpful for a new teacher, very intentional. Yep, very intentional about the use of the formative assessment process. And I like that, Katie, too. At the end, after it's been taught, jot yourself some notes, what went well, what didn't, and then bring it out next year when you're thinking about teaching that particular, if you're lucky enough to be in the same grade, in the same, school, the same content, what do I need to do? Doug Fisher-esque. Yes, that's probably true because we do dig into Doug Fisher here and there. So a lot of experts have kind of come into play when we use this. We do have some filled out, actually. We do have some examples. So I could probably make sure that I send those to Shellie and to Heather and get you some examples of what this would look like. It does get a little bit overwhelming. And I know teachers in many of the districts that I'm in, sometimes teachers aren't even asked to do lesson planning anymore. If it's something that is required, maybe even of brand new teachers, I think it's just a nice template to start to use to kind of give you the framework. And then, as you get more and more, comfortable and your depth of knowledge around teaching is increasing and you don't feel like you need this, you can kind of move away from it. But hopefully some of those essential pieces and parts kind of will stick with you and it will become just sort of second nature and it will just become the way that you do business so that you wouldn't have to fill this out for everything that you're doing every time. But it is a good framework to start with. And I agree that within your coaching cycles, I think this might be something nice that you would be able to introduce the teachers to. All right, so thank you for that. That was component 1, strategy 1, planning. Now we're moving into component 2, which is learning target use. And under learning target use, which would be the big strategy, there are 3 practices that we really engage in to really make the formative assessment process come alive within our classrooms. The first one is learning targets and success criteria. The second one is being very intentional and thoughtful about how we take those learning targets and success criteria and create that trajectory of learning in order to get kids successful on the standard that these learning targets and success criteria have been derived from. And then thinking about if we have examples and/or really well-developed rubrics that give students an understanding of what success looks like when they have accomplished that learning target. And of course, those exemplars and rubrics are built on the success criteria. So when we think about this, when we start at the beginning, and we know that we have end of grade level expectations that have been presented to us from the Michigan Department of Ed, we know that we can go on and we can find the career and college readiness standards, and it can say in 3rd grade, by the end of 3rd grade, this is what the kids need to know and be able to do. We also know that there is a lot in many of those standards, and it becomes very overwhelming for teachers to really parse out what is the content and what is the rigor of what it is that we need our students to know and be able to do. So having those standards is nice, but it takes a little bit of time and it takes a little energy to go through as a team, ideally within a district of 3rd grade teachers, to say, what does this standard really mean? What am I supposed to be teaching? What are the students supposed to be learning? And what does proficiency for us as a 3rd grade team mean that we need to see our students say, do, make, or write in order for us to say that they are proficient and ready to move on to the next layer of learning? So in my mind, that means we need to unwrap many of these standards together as a team within a professional learning community so that we have consistency, that we have coherence, that we have horizontal alignment between anybody who might be teaching those grade level standards. And then we start to think about our vertical alignment, right? So 2nd grade is building on what 1st grade is doing. They're getting kids ready for 3rd grade. 3rd grade teachers know when to and how to just meet the kids where they're at when they're coming out of 2nd into 3rd. and create that vertical alignment that is really key within a guaranteed viable curriculum and becomes really key when we're starting to think about how we're assessing kids and making sure that we have the right rigor. So we know that learning targets kind of got a bad rap here in the state of Michigan. There are all kinds of memes all over Facebook and Instagram and all those things about, oh, I had to put my learning targets on the board because the admin was coming in today, right? And it really became more of a compliance thing than something that was actually based in research. We know that happened a couple of years ago when we started to revise our educator evaluation laws. And then all of a sudden, all of the tools that we were using, whether it was Marzano, Thoughtful Classrooms, 5 Dimensions, or the other one, it was all Marzano. It was all about putting these learning targets on the board. Well, there was a reason that all of that was put into those observation tools. And that's because the research is overwhelming in terms of the fact that if kids know what it is you want them to know and be able to do and what success on it looks like, they are almost 100% able to do that for you than if you keep them in the dark and they have no idea what the lesson is about, what the activities linked to that lesson, what they need to be learning, what they need to be, what pieces of knowledge that they need. When we make it crystal clear for the kids, it helps them. It gives them that goal. It gives them that target that they need to get to in order to be successful. So we also know that it's a lesson's worth of content, and we also know that that lesson might cover more than one period. So I remember when I was at RISA and I would go into districts and they would be like, oh, I have to change my learning targets every day because, my admin might come in. And if there are learning targets that were there from yesterday, I might get dinged. It's not what this is about. It's about giving kids that guidance, right? It's about giving kids the understanding. It's not being done for your admin. It's being done because the kids need that level of clarity. And you might have a learning target, especially in ELA, that might last for 2 or 3 days, or it might last for a week. There are some that last all year long, right? Because you're continually trying to engage kids in text and reading and writing and so on and so forth. We also know that what we're teaching today is built on what we taught yesterday, and it's going to connect to what we're going to teach tomorrow. So we know that these learning targets are positioned in a trajectory, right? It's not that these are random acts of teaching. It is a consistent process. It's a journey of teaching. And so students need to understand that today we're going to be learning about this. It's built on what we did yesterday. It's going to help us when we get to tomorrow. They need to understand that this is a trajectory, right? And then, of course, when we figure out what these learning targets are and we figure out what success on them looks like, it ensures to a better degree that the activities and tasks and things that we're having the kids do are going to be more aligned. They're going to be more specific. So learning targets become very, very important. And it's not just about the learning target. It's about how we're using them in the classroom, that we're really making sure that they're in student-friendly language, that we are identifying the pieces of content and the skill and the practice that's embedded in that standard that the students need to learn. We know that we have to retain the rigor that the standard is asking the students to engage in. And again, my thought, the best way to do this is through some sort of unwrapping, unpacking, deconstructing, call it what you want. You have to have clarity, and there has to be consistent clarity. And when I think about some of your coaching pieces, one of the things that Steve Seward said was make sure that there is clear expectations. When you're going in and you're coaching one of your coachees, that you have a clear outcome in terms of why you're there. Same thing with the students. Clear outcome as to why they're there. Every kid wants to know what their purpose is, right? And so the more that we can articulate for them at the beginning of a lesson, during the lesson, at the end of the lesson, the better off we're going to be. Student-friendly language, they have to be shared with the students. That doesn't mean they have to be put on the board. Susan Burkhart used to say, a target on the board is not a target in the mind. We want to get the targets in the mind. So they have to be used, they have to be communicated, they have to be aligned with the tasks and the activities that you're engaging kids in, the evidence that you're gathering to determine whether or not they're going to be successful. They have to be within that trajectory. And we need to create that learning progression, right? We have to think about how we take these learning targets and align them, stair-step them, if you will, so that we're starting where the kids are, right? But then getting them to where they need to be. And that's the key. We can't just teach the low-hanging fruit and never get to where they need to be. We need to make sure that we are getting them to proficiency on the entirety of the standard even if that's asking the kids to go deeper into the rigor. When you have that level of understanding, not only are your students going to be more successful, but you are going to be more successful because you are going to have a better understanding of how you need to assess the kids because you know exactly what it is that you need to be looking for in order to determine whether or not they're proficient. So they do provide that roadmap for both you and the students, and it does provide that clarity that allows them to hit that target or attain that target, become proficient in that target. We also need to recognize that depending on the verbs that are in our standards, some of those standards are just asking kids to learn a new concept, and it's where you're just introducing it to them. Then there are other standards where you are building on it, or you're having the kids extend their understanding and their knowledge. Sometimes they actually need to be able to apply it, and then other times they actually need to be able to transfer it into new situations. So when I talk about the unwrapping process, one of the biggest pieces of that is to look at those verbs and the context in which those verbs are used so that you can really determine what's the outcome, what's the proficiency. I have a lot of times where I have teachers trying to get kids to proficiency on standards or a learning target that's been derived from a standard, when in reality, all they need to do is introduce it, right? They just need to introduce it. They just need to get the kids' feet wet just a little bit. They're not submerging them in it yet. And so that level of clarity can help release some of that anxiety about having to get kids, to certain levels, when in reality, the standard is only asking them to do a little bit. Of course, on the reverse side, if standards are asking the kids at that grade level to actually be able to transfer it, then they have to be able to transfer it. You can't just introduce it and say that, kids are proficient if they're asking them to take it and put it into a larger context. So having clarity around that is huge. The success criteria, in my opinion, are the I can statements. So I don't know about you guys, but when we first brought out these learning targets, everybody was I can, I can, I can. But in reality, you take all those I cans, you add them up, what are you able to do? The I can statements are actually the success criteria. All that success criteria added up is the learning target. So if I said that I can capitalize the first letter, I can have an end punctuation, I can have a noun, I can have a verb, I can have that noun and a verb agree. If I can do all of those things, what have I done? I've written a complete sentence. So if my learning target is to write a complete sentence, then the I can, I can, I can, I can, I can becomes my success criteria. And when I'm looking at my students' writing, I'm looking for, do they have a capital letter at the beginning word? Do they have a period? Do they have a subject? Do they have a verb? Do they have agreement? If so, then they've met that learning target. So kind of reframing what we think about when we think about I can statements, learning targets, success criteria. I already talked about learning progressions. Just really important that kids recognize that we're not just up there randomly teaching them stuff, that there is a process, that there is a journey, that there is a progression, and that it's all dependent and connected. And then, of course, exemplars and rubrics become really, really important because we want to make sure that if we have an idea of what success looks like, we need to share that with the students so that they can be as close to that as possible. There's a great commercial about, I don't remember what it's about, but it's about having clarity. And at one point, they have a bunch of kids in there playing basketball. And at some point, they turn the lights out. And all the kids are trying to play basketball with no lights. And it's like shooting in the dark, right? And when we don't have exemplars, when we don't have rubrics, sometimes we are asking kids to shoot in the dark. And then we're assessing them against this nebulous understanding of what we think proficiency is. If they don't have that understanding, if we don't have that understanding, then we are just shooting in the dark. So what I want to do is show you a couple of examples through video. So in order to do that, what I'd like you to do is find handout number 2. And handout number 2 it's just a quick, this is a very quick video, and many of you have probably seen it before, but I want you to look at it again in terms of thinking about what might be the learning target in this particular lesson. And you're really hearing the end result of this lesson, so you're going to have to make some inferences. What might be the learning target that this student was subjected to that got her to this point? And then what might be the success criteria? So what do you think is the overall goal of the lesson, and what might be some of the success criteria? Okay, so I'm going to show you this video. It's very quick, but I want you to think about those two questions. And if you don't have handout number 2, that's fine. Just on a piece of paper, what might be the learning target and what might be the success criteria. And let's hope, everybody, that this plays. So here we go.
Sarah, can you tell us how this chart works? We'll point to them and tell us about it.
I know nobody's on this, but some people may not be on this.
How come?
Because some people won't do that because we're in kindergarten, but some people might do that.
Good. Now go further up the chart and tell us about the middle of it, Sarah, around the orange crayon.
Well, some people sound it out and try and make their letters neat on this one.
Good. And what about further up the chart, Sarah? Then what happens?
On this one, they try to sound it out. They try to make their letters neatly and try to make the thing right. This is where I am. I sound it out. I try to keep them nicely written. I try to make the right words. I try to keep the letters with a space before they start. And I'm going over to here because it's the last step and I'm over at the 9 step. This is the 10 step.
Okay, so keep your thoughts in terms of what might be the overall target that the teacher is aiming for. She's got that rubric up there. And then what might be some of the success criteria that Sarah was articulating. Hold that in your head. We're going to go into a breakout room and share, so don't share yet. But I want to show you another example. Now, this example is a little bit older in terms of the students. This is a 7th grade, and I know many of you are not coaching people in the 7th grade world. This could probably be done in 3rd, 4th. It's just a really good example, right? So again, what might be the learning target and what might be some of the success criteria? And then just look at some of the other teacher moves in this particular video and see what you notice. This is by somebody that you probably might recognize if you've been in the world of literacy for a while. This is Kate Roberts. She was associated with the Teaching and Writing Project that was out of, I can't remember, was it Carnegie Mellon? I can't remember. But just watch and think about what might be the learning target and what might be some of the success criteria. Starts out low, but you should be able to hear it once she...
You have been working on your essays. And one of the things I noticed when I was looking at your essays last night is you guys have moves. Like, you know something about essay writing. I was looking through all of your essays, and I was thinking about some of the things that you know about how to make strong arguments that you've learned since you've been here and in your writing work. You guys know that essays always have a strong claim. You know that the claim has support, has reasons, that there's evidence for every reason you make, that the intro should hook you and set up the essay, that there's a conclusion. And the thing that impressed me the most about your writing was that you also know that essays often have a counterclaim, where you name, what would someone say who disagrees with me, okay? What we want to do today is, I'm really proud of you. I feel like you're ready to lift the level of your essay up a little bit. You've got the foundation down. Now let's build a building. So the way we're going to build the building of your essay to make it feel like it's even better than the way you know how to write it now is we're going to take a look at one of the paragraphs of an essay that I found out in the world, and we're going to look at what do authors do when they're trying to make really strong arguments or they're trying to be really persuasive, okay? So I'm going to read this. You see, first of all, how long this body paragraph is, right? One thing we see is that authors sometimes do a lot of things when they're trying to make their points strong and persuasive. So I'm going to read this piece, and what I want you guys to think about is what is it that this author does that makes his body paragraph strong and persuasive? Okay, you got it? All right, let's read. In a big business at the expense of the real neighborhoods surrounding it. Okay, so let's take a second, and with the person sitting next to you, can you turn and talk about what is it that makes this part of an essay feel strong and persuasive? Okay, turn and talk.
And like back to the idea that you said the big stores should be there.
Shut it down. The area that has a sports arena, because it's like all about sports. Like, nobody wants to go all the way somewhere farther when you could just have strong argument. It's like he's kind of showing you. He's showing both sides of the view. Because he's bringing like something that someone who wants to have that arena there. He mentions things that are good, and he also mentions someone who doesn't like it.
So he not only has the counterclaim, but he doesn't want to saying this is why the counterclaim isn't as strong as mine.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, let's come together. Let's come together. So let's hear a little bit of what you noticed makes this piece of an essay feel really strong or really developed, okay? Let's hear, Ryan and Nitin, you were saying something that felt really strong.
Yeah, I was talking about like the story had a lot of specific details.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that the evidence or the details the author used wasn't just general, that he got really specific or precise. Can you cite a line in this essay that does that work?
When he was saying that the Triangle Sports Store on Fifth Avenue, it shut its doors, like it closed, because there had to be a new store there because it didn't fit in the neighborhood.
Okay. So instead of just saying as its evidence, some stores shut down, and that's really sad. They were really specific by naming the Triangle Store. Really nice. So we can say that one way we can develop our essays is that we can add really specific, or sometimes people say precise, details as our evidence. Really nice work. And can you turn and talk? And can you name what are 2 things on this list or anything else that you noticed that you think you want to do to your essay that this author did to theirs? Turn and talk.
Was to put more emotions. Like, kids get bullied, right? And then they have lots of emotions. I didn't add that, and like that's what I want to add so I can relate like how they felt when they were bullied. So that's what I need to add to make this a better essay, and you know, to make it more persuasive.
So, class, your work today?
All right, I'm going to stop it there. And I'm going to ask you guys to get into a breakout room. And in the breakout room, what I'd like you to do, you have about 8 minutes. And I want you to first think about, Sarah, what was the learning target? What was the success criteria? And then think about this particular video in terms of Kate. Kate Roberts is her name. And I'm sorry I can't respond in the chat to anything when my videos are playing because it stops the videos. And Aaron, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with yours. I'm not a Zoom expert, but hopefully you were able to engage somewhere.
I finally did get it. It's a tab.
Good.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Those videos are embedded too in the PowerPoint, so hopefully you'll be able to get them as well. And then I can send them to you if you need. Anyway, we're going to get into these breakout rooms. We're going to have a couple of what are you noticing about the learning targets and the success criteria based on those 2 questions from those handouts 2 and 3. And we'll see you in about 8 minutes. Great. All right, I think everybody is back. So hopefully you had some good conversation and you were able to identify some of the learning targets and the success criteria from those 2 examples. The gathering of the evidence piece, or the eliciting evidence piece, is the next big component or strategy. And within that strategy, there are things like activating prior knowledge, making sure that the tasks that you're engaging the students in, the activities, the assignments are of high quality and that are aligned with the learning targets and the success criteria, and that the questions that you're asking and the questions that the students are asking are also aligned, that they're around the content, they're asking kids to engage in those content. When you gather this evidence, we want to make sure that it's high quality. We want to make sure that it is tightly aligned with the learning targets and in particular the success criteria. We know that teachers who gather the right evidence and who actually interpret and analyze that evidence to determine where they're going to go next, whether that be, you know, essential 3 and the groupings that you make, the centers that you might develop, the interventions that you might need for some kids, the acceleration for other kids. All of that is much more focused and targeted and beneficial when you're using evidence and not just guessing, right? And not just thinking you know without really verifying that you know or certifying that you know through the use of this evidence that you're gathering. We also know that this happens best when it's practice, right? When the kids are in a low stakes environment, they're just showing you what they know in a way that is authentic, that's natural, that is just part of that teaching and learning process. We know that there could be a variety of tools that are used to gather this evidence. They might be things such as observations, conversations, artifacts. Margaret Heritage loves to say, what can the students say, do, make, or write that give you the information that you need in order to determine whether or not they are successful. We know that the tools need to provide information about the student's thinking and understanding, not just if they got the right answer, right? The right answer is great, but if we don't know how they achieved that right answer, if we don't know how they, what their thinking was, the metacognition that was involved in how they got that right answer, it's not telling us a lot in terms of their learning. It might tell us a little bit in terms of their doing and them being compliant, but they could have copied it. But when they actually have to start expressing themselves and explaining themselves and justifying themselves, that comes from a place of understanding and deeper learning. The most important aspect for the teacher is to gather information about what the students are actually thinking and why. And that's the metacognition piece. And that is your essential number 9. When you think about what it is that you do in terms of your coaching that is directly related to the assessment world, it's right here. And those questioning strategies are a big piece of that. What questions are you asking that are helping students dig deeper into their thinking? Not just getting at the right answer, but getting into the thinking or the wrong answer, but the thinking that went into it, right? Because that's the way we help kids is by asking those probing questions, by asking those clarifying questions, by asking those follow-up questions. Those are the things that are so essential that we don't just say, yeah, that's the right answer and move on. We always ask that follow-up question. What was your thinking behind that? How did you arrive at that? What strategy did you use? What process were you engaging in when you thought about that? And really start to get kids thinking about their thinking. And when I think of Steve Sewell, and he talks about, those pillars of coaching, is this what he's asking you to do with the teachers that you're coaching with? As you model that, so those teachers should be taking that and using it also in the classroom and modeling that with their students as well, because that's what good formative assessment is. It's about coaching the students as you are coaching the teachers to get to the level of performance that we're asking them to engage in. So I'm going to show you another video. And I want you just to listen to this particular teacher and some of the questions that she asks and how the student responds and how he's able to explain some of his thinking in terms of that, the questions that she's asking. And then we're going to go back into a breakout room for just a couple of minutes and just debrief what we see here. So think about the questions and how this student responds. This is a local teacher. She might even be on the call. I don't know her name, but I know that she's from Michigan. So here we go.
So today, when you guys are reading independently, I want you to continue to think about the author's purpose, and I want you thinking about why did the author write this? What does the author want me to know or to explain? So you're going to find a quiet spot and an informational textbook that you can read to think about the author's purpose. Okay. Rodney, what are you reading today?
I'm reading National Geographic book.
And Matt, what's the title of this book?
Tiger and Trouble.
Ah.
It's not just about tigers. It's about these animals that live somewhere, but they had to move to a zoo.
Interesting, because I'm noticing that this is a chapter book, and it looks like you're on about the last chapter in the book. So have you noticed something that was similar about the other chapters?
similar. Yeah, that all of them like lived somewhere they were just fine, but then they were not fine. They just kept getting sick, and then they went to a zoo, and the caretakers at the zoo, they cared for them very much.
So, if you think about the author, the person who wrote this, what is the author trying to explain in all these stories about animals that were sick and then went to the zoo to be cared for?
She's trying to explain about you should care about all animals.
Do you have any connections to that from any other stories we've been reading?
Yeah,
What is that?
about Ivan.
How is that book? 'Cause that's a fictional book. How is that similar to this one?
Since it wasn't like a true story, it was just made up. It still had animals that are sick and that weren't were not taken care of well, and they ended up going to a zoo.
So what you're doing is you're making connections because this is a nonfiction book, and you're making a connection to a fiction book called The One and Only Ivan. And you're seeing that in both books, the author wants you to know that it's important to take care of animals. So you're thinking about the theme between two different books. Really excellent job reading. Keep doing that while you finish.
I'm gonna
Today
jump
when you
into
guys are reading,
only once. Gonna jump into a breakout room. And we're going to, what did you notice about how she was gathering the evidence, the questions that she was using to gather evidence from that student, how he responded, and what wonderings or connections are you making to your own context? We'll give you about 5 minutes in this breakout room. Okay, I think everybody's back, so we are going to continue on. The next component, big strategy, is formative feedback. And within formative feedback, we have several practices that we like to see in play in a classroom where formative assessment is being implemented well. That would be feedback from the teacher, feedback from colleagues or peers, and then feedback for themselves, and that self-reflection piece. So we know that formative feedback is different than evaluative feedback. The purpose of formative feedback is to feed forward, to continue to move the kids. The feedback that I give a student today should be different than the feedback that I give them tomorrow, because hopefully they've taken that feedback, they've used that feedback, and they've moved themselves forward. And so I can move on to the next chunk of understanding that they need in order to be successful. We know that it does not have to be written. If you think about the example of that we just watched with Kate Roberts, she gave all of those kids feedback without writing anything on their papers. She said, I looked at all your papers last night. This is what I noticed. You're all doing really well in blah, 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 blah. And she listed the success criteria. She said, now we're going to use an exemplar. So we're going to get some feedback from a person out there in the real world. We're going to list, and then we're going to come up with some more success criteria. And basically, the students were self-reflecting and giving themselves feedback after having conversations with one another. So her feedback was what they had done really well. Their feedback then was what they needed to do next, right? And that conversation with the little boy at the end, where he was talking about he needed to put more emotion, that came from him. That was his ownership. She could have written that on his paper. She could have written that on 3 kids' papers in that classroom, and they wouldn't have even noticed it or taken it to heart the way that he did, because he came up with it through his own discovery, through that scenario, that task that she had engaged those students in. Feedback is important. When you look at the research, number one, in terms of standard deviations and what gives us the most bang for our buck in terms of really advancing student achievement, clarity in terms of what we want students to know and be able to do is a 1.44. If you look some of the research from John Hattie, and feedback is always around 0.75, 0.8. It is a huge impact. And you know what? Clarity in terms of what we want students to know and be able to do and good feedback are completely free. But it has to be the right kind of feedback. It can't be good job. What does good job say? All right, I did something good. What do I need to do in order to get better? A B plus. What does that tell a kid? They did something well enough to get a B plus. Who knows what it was? They didn't do something well enough to get an A. Who knows what that is? Grades, scores, comments that are evaluative are not good formative feedback. Formative feedback is in relation to the learning target and the success criteria. You did this really well. Now you need to take this next step. And it's not every next step. It's the next logical step in terms of that learning progression. Clarity around what it is that you want students to know and be able to do really helps you focus in on where the students are at. Getting the right evidence gives you that tool that you need to determine what those next steps are. And yes, it might be completely different for 35 kids sitting in the classroom, but chances are there's going to be patterns and trends, just like Kate Roberts saw when she was thinking about where the students were at. And yes, it should think you about the way that you're coaching, right? Because this is what you're being asked to do as a coach of teachers. This is what we're asking those teachers to do as a coach for their students through the formative assessment process and moving them forward. So it has to relate to the learning targets and success criteria. We always want to start with the positive, what they have done well, celebrate that, where they need to move to next. Has to be timely. If I'm walking through the classroom and kids are asking me questions, I'm giving feedback the entire time. I'm not getting 80 research papers turned in the day before grades are due and giving feedback on them. It's too late by that time, right? You want to give the feedback along the way, not when it's done. There's a lot of research that says that if it's summative and you put a grade and you put feedback on the summative pieces, kids aren't even going to look at the feedback. They're going to look at their grade. They make that judgment. They moved on. You're just wasting your time putting words on paper if it's a summative event. If it's summative, evaluate them, give them the grade, move on. But before they get to that point where they turn in that final thing, like if they're doing writing and they do draft 1, draft 2, that's where you give the feedback. So that by the time they turn in that final, you don't need to put feedback on that, right? It's done, it's over. You should have had the impact along the way. Must be descriptive. This is what you did well, and actionable. This is where you need to go to next. When we think about feedback from teachers, the primary thing is that we want the kids to think, not react emotionally because they got an A or an F or a 0 or a red ink or a lot of purple ink or green ink or whatever color ink you think is most appropriate. You want them to think, what did I do well? What did I need to do next? Has to be in relation to the learning target and the success criteria. We need to give the kids the opportunity to use this feedback. We don't just give them feedback and then say, now you're on your own. We put them in pairs, we have them think, we have them sit, we have them reflect. John Dewey used to say, we don't learn from our experiences, we learn from reflecting on our experiences, and we need to give them the time to reflect. So in that planning template, we work in opportunities to give the feedback, and we work in opportunities for students to reflect on that feedback. And we don't think of that as lost teaching time. We think of that as the most important teaching and learning time, right? And then once they get the feedback, they need to use it and they need to act on it. Once we show them how to do this and we model this from feedback from the teacher, then we start to engage the kids in this feedback process as well. And we know that this is something that kids do very, very well outside the classroom. They give each other feedback on how to play games, how to, do sports. But for some reason, when they get in the classroom, they're stymied. And part of that reason is they don't have clarity. They don't know the rules of the game. They don't know the success criteria. They don't know what the outcome needs to be. That's where those learning targets and that clarity piece comes in. And then, of course, once they do it for each other and they begin to do it for themselves. And they begin to think about that teacher voice or that peer voice in their head when it becomes really important and they need to have those conversations for themselves. We don't have time to watch this video, but I'll make sure it's uploaded.
Feedback is a powerful way to achieve.
We're going to watch it. No, we're not. In this video, it just basically says everything I said. But one thing that they also mention is that it's also important to give students feedback, not only on the learning targets and the success criteria, but the processes that they use to engage in those learning targets and success criteria and their self-regulation habits. So their organization, their time, their study habits, things like that. So feedback on the content is important, but feedback on the thinking and the metacognition and the processes and the strategies that they use, and feedback on the self-regulation pieces can be really important as well. And I would venture to say in your coaching cycles, that might be really important for some of the teachers that you're coaching as well. What are some of the processes that they're using and are they working well? And what are some of their self-regulation habits that might be getting in the way? So giving feedback on all three of those can be really important. So I would encourage you to watch that video and we'll skip that chat reflection. The last piece is after you've done all of this, and remember, this is a cycle, this is recursive. We use the evidence that we've collected, we use the feedback that we give the kids to make adjustments. And we look at what our lesson plan says or our formative assessment plan, and we say, are we still on track? Do we need to recircle back in? Do I need to take care of some misconception? Do I need to rethink this? Do I need to come up with plan B? Or am I ready to continue to move on because all of my students are right where they need to be and we're ready for that next step? What centers do I need to create? What small groups might I need to do? What interventions might I need? What accelerations might I need based on all of this body of evidence that I've collected? And that closes the cycle, right? Because if we don't do that piece, then everything that we've done before is just a waste of time. We've just collected all of this evidence to do nothing with it. And that's not the formative assessment process. We want to make sure that we are doing something with this evidence, that we are impacting, that we are moving the students forward, that we are filling in those gaps, misconceptions, and things that they need in order to continue to move them forward. That's what this teacher did. I'm going to stop this and just tell you, when she was done with the lesson, when she was in the middle of a lesson, excuse me, she wanted to make sure that a key piece of information that she had shared with the kids was solidified. And so she had them do an exit ticket. She took the exit ticket and she kind of analyzed it to see where the kids were at. And she used a stoplighting method. So she had this sheet, and you can tell that there are two kids that are red, need a little bit of extra help. The four that are yellow, I need to have some conversation with these kids. Those that are green, pretty much good to go. It's just a one sheet kind of quick observation. And then she wrote some notes of where the kids needed next steps and how she might regroup and how she might reteach, how she might just have a private conversation with a couple of kids, maybe do a little group work, maybe take a green and a yellow and partner them up, those types of things. So it gave her just a quick idea of what she might needed to do next in terms of her and their learning journey. So all of this together really helps us with Essential 3. It's embedded in Essential 4. And just a couple of reflection questions for you in terms of what you might have learned, what you might have relearned, what you might have unlearned in terms of what formative assessment could look like within a classroom setting when implemented well. And just as additional resources, there is this chart that I included as handout number 4. And if you wanted to dig deeper into each of these practices or elements that we talked about today, when you pull this up on your computer, you see where it is purple and it's underlined. That is a link to an article. They're called learning points and they are front and back. And so it just gives you a little bit more detailed description of what each of the practices that we kind of touched on today, some a little bit more than others, but it just gives you some additional reading, some additional learning that you can engage in to get a more clear understanding about these practices and how they fit together within the formative assessment process. So that, my friends, is my time. And I went through the end very quickly, and I apologize. I get to talking. And when I get to talking, I'm just passionate about this stuff. But I really hope that you were able to learn a couple of things, that you were able to relearn a couple of things, that maybe you unlearned something. And I really appreciate your time and attention. And I think you're on for a good rest of your afternoon. And hopefully everybody has a good day and happy holidays.
Well, thank you so much, Ellen, for everything that you have shared with us this morning. You can see there's lots of love floating up, even a Christmas tree, right? Lots of love floating up on the screen as well as in the chat. So we really do appreciate everything that you bring to this group. With that, I'm going to share my screen quickly. And we're going to end with a reflection for Ellen. Just like she talks to us about that formative assessment, she really likes to take that feedback back and think about, what did you learn from the session today? What did you relearn? And what did you unlearn? So I'm going to start that poll, and I'm asking that during your break, and again, you can take it from this screen, it's also on our agenda, but we're going to take a 15-minute break and come back at 10:35. So we can get up, we can move. If you can fill this out during that time, that would be amazing. We'll adjust everything by a few minutes, so we won't start lunch right at 12, because we'll need that full time together, but we will come back at 10:35. Thank you so much again, Ellen, and thank you to all of you for your learning and your engagement this morning. Can't wait to dig into essentials for grades 4-5 with you in about 15 minutes.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you, Shellie. And thank you, Erin. I will try to upload these things as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Yep. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.